They showed me the very first CDJ that they had, and I was like, whoa.
Suddenly, I stopped using vinyl.
I think that was the point where I thought, okay, this is the future.
When the first CDJs came out, I was 2 years old.
My first impression was kind of like, what? Oh, that doesn't sound too cool, whatever.
This is like the best way to DJ. Like, I don't want a laptop, I don't want anything else. I just want to plug my USB in and use this for everything I need.
It was the beginning of creating an industry standard.
Felt like such a big jump.
The evil sync button.
I mean, it's a thing that I really detest.
Where can you go? What else do we need?
That beautiful black box has evolved into something quite special.
Oh, I like that.
当時、カラオケがすごい日本では流行っておりまして、ビジネスとしても大成功しておりました。その海外ではディスコで踊るというカルチャーがメインカルチャーだったんですけども、そのディスコでは DJ がアナログターンテーブルを使って、DJ プレイをしているという状況だったんですよね。で、それを、当時の、パイオニアの、私の前の担当の人が見て、だったらパイオニアは CD プレイが得意なので、じゃあこれを、バイナルアナログターンテーブルじゃなくて CD で DJ やったらいいんじゃないという、そういう流れで、流れとなってましたね。はい。
もうそれも30数年前になりますんで、ずいぶん前ですけれども、で、業務用の、チェンジャー、CD のチェンジャーであるとか、そういった、商品をですね、設計するチームに入ったんですけれども、DJ のチームの方がもう大変多忙になってきて、そっちを手伝ってくれというふうに言われて、その後、今に至るというような感じで、来ていますね。はい。で、DJ のチームっていうのは本当に小さなチームで
CD で DJ をできるんじゃないのかなという流れになった時に、じゃあ渥美くんそれをやってくれというミッションが下りました。
I think the first people that I ever heard of having CDJs was some DJs that had a really popular radio show in LA called the Baker Boys.
When the CDJ 500 came out, I was just a little know-it-all working in a record shop.
I was 2 years old.
Because I worked in the shop, people would come in and say, oh, have you heard you can mix on CDs now? You know, get out of it.
There was always going to be a transition with how you're going to be able to take music, how much you could bring on the road now, how much people could play, the accessibility of it.
My first impression was kind of like, what? Oh, that doesn't sound too cool, whatever.
It was strange. It was different. I'd been really used to playing vinyl.
A friend of mine in Tokyo named DJ Takada, right as they started developing their first CDJ, he started working with Pioneer, and then they showed me the very first CDJ that they had, and I was like, whoa.
本当に当社最初のDJ 用の機材だったので、
まずは、CD でバイナルと同じことができるようにしたいと。で、続いてそれだけだと DJ は CD を使ってくれないんじゃないのかな。同じことができるんであればやっぱりバイナルを使うよというような流れになると思うんですけども、我々はですね、当社はその時はまず、バイナルでできないこと、CD ならではデジタルならではの機能を行うことによって、より DJ に使っていただきたいなというふうに考えました。
First thing I noticed was it was going to be a lot lighter to carry CD books than carrying my vinyl.
We had a guy that used to come into the record shop called Pompey Sai, and he came in one day with a CDJ 500, the big chunky one.
First machine that I used was like, it had a flip top.
It was a very square, boxy device that had a flip top CD load in, so it was more like a traditional CD players.
デジタルならでは CD ならではの機能としてはマスターテンポとループっていうのがあるんですけども、
It had looping function, which wasn't as precise as it is right now, but it would give me the ability to start looping sections of acapellas and so on and so forth.
You had a time code and stuff, so it was just like, oh right, okay.
It was very rudimentary compared to what's in play now.
一般的な CD プレイヤーにはリピート機能っていうのがありまして、ただ B 点から A 点に戻る間に音が切れてしまうんですよね。それを CDJ500 では切れないループができないかということでいろいろと検討しました。ダンスミュージックって、4の倍数で繰り返し行うというのがセオリーといいますか、で1小節が4拍、それが4小節、だから8小節とか、そういう形で繰り返し音楽がこうなっているパターンっていうのが結構あるんですけども、ということでまず切れないループを作ろう。そうすると、今まで AB 間リピートで1小節のループを作ったとしても、綺麗な1小節のループができない。だけど切れないループを作れば、繰り返しの1小節のループを作ることができる。4小節のループが作ることができる。
It's pretty rudimentary at the time. It was like you couldn't scratch on it. The jog wheel was kind of, it was usable but unresponsive.
It was a bit plasticky, I have to admit.
And I don't know if it was the CDs that I was burning, but the one I had used to skip quite often.
我々の方としてもいろいろ調査をしたんですけれども、大きな音量下で再生すると、ディスク自体が振動して音飛びが発生してしまうんですね。何日もそういった研究するエリアにこもってですね、対策を生み出していかなきゃいけない状況だったんですけれども、最終的には音をいかに遮断するか、機器内に音をどうやって遮断していくかっていう部分と、ディスクを安定化するためにどうスタビライズするか、スタビライズするための抑えるような機能を入れるとか、そういったような対応をして、対策を講じていったというような記憶もあります。
The question I had in my mind is, how durable is this? Is it going to last, being set up and put back in a case every day and flown and, going on in an airplane?
Q ボタンとかプレイボタンっていうのはもう大変多くの回数強く叩いて使われますので、そういったところでもやっぱりすぐにやっぱり壊れてしまってお客様も困ってしまいますから、そういったところはやっぱり気を使って設計したり、試験したりというようなことをやっております。
And that's one thing I would say I've never had a problem with any Pioneer gear is its durability.
そう考えると、やはり品質というのも大変大きなファクターで、ここはやっぱり外せないなというふうに思っています。
There was resistance from a lot of the vinyl community, but like anything, it's what you're familiar with. And I think when people get comfortable, change isn't always the easiest thing to come to them. I happen to be somebody that's comfortable being uncomfortable.
The more I started thinking about it, and once I finally saw them being used and got my hands on them, I kind of went, actually, this is kind of revolutionary.
I knew from the very beginning that was going to be a game changer in how music was going to be played at clubs.
You can literally play demos that you're working on. You don't have to go cut acetates.
DJs back then were burning acetates, costing God knows what. I couldn't afford any of that, so it was a way to have exclusive tracks.
I quickly changed my opinion to thinking, oh, this is great. It's another new toy for DJs, another way we can express ourselves.
I would say my full transition from vinyl to CD probably happened within the space of 6 months to a year.
I think at the beginning of it, and definitely before the thousands came through, people were using both.
My love for my vinyl collection and my Technics, it was everything I knew and I didn't want it to change. And so I was very resistant at first. And it was when the CDJ1000 came out and that you could scratch and stuff. Then I think that was the point where I thought, okay, this is the future.
When Pioneer introduced the CDJ1000, it was the beginning of creating an industry standard.
CDJ1000 ですね。こちらは、スクラッチができる CD プレイヤーとなったので、苦労はしましたが。
The first time I saw it was the prototype, and then several months after the prototype, they actually brought me the finished working model. And I was blown away by what it could do
It was the thousands that changed everything.
One of my first ever big gigs was at Cream at Nation in Liverpool. In fact, it was my first big gig. I was warming up for Sasha, and during the sound check, Alan, the manager there, he was like, "Have you seen this? It's a CDJ 1000." And it was the first time I'd seen one.
My first setup was 1000. That was actually what we had in the clubs in Kiev.
First of all, it looked like the Batmobile.
The thing that really excited me was when they said, we are working at emulating the feel of vinyl.
Now this is the CDJ 1000, so keep in mind this is using only CDs. There's no vinyl involved, no camera tricks, no audio post-production. This is truly the first digital scratching ever recorded. Don't try this at home. Check it out.
Quit talking and start mixing. Yes. Quit talking and start mixing. Party alarm!
我々もDJ の機材に参入するにあたって、やはりアナログターンテーブルに対しても大変深いリスペクトを持って接しておりましたので、どうすればアナログターンテーブルの操作感を超えてお客様に提供できるんだろうというのはもう常に考えてたことではありました。
Suddenly, I stopped using vinyl.
For me, it was all about the scratching and like the fact that you could change the break speed to emulate vinyl. It was mind-blowing at the time.
The hump that a lot of DJs had to get over that were transitioning from vinyl to CDs was it didn't feel the same. So there were certain things you really, previous to that, couldn't do on CDJs. You really couldn't scratch on CDJs. So the entire hip-hop community was kind of left out of that.
The first 1000 felt really true.
I remember doing that, and I liken it to the first time that I used an iPhone, the touchscreen on an iPhone, and the scratching of a CDJ was the two sort of times where I think these things are magical.
So things like cutting you can do quite easily on a CDJ. Certain other types of scratch moves, I never felt like I could do that well on a CDJ. So I just quickly learned, okay, here's what I can do and sounds good and sounds pure, and here's the things I just shouldn't try.
I also knew they still had a way to go to really get the timings tight, to really get the scratch so that it actually was very quickly responsive. But at the same time, it was leaps and bounds from where they had been before.
それで、この商品が出た時の、この商品は、マーク1、マーク2、マーク3と3世代あるんですが、マーク3あたりからもう、DJ はバイナルからCD を使う DJ の方が多くなってきた。
The clubs started taking their turntables out and putting the CDJs in. It started to be phased in as the standard.
逆転してきたということで、その元々の目標を達成したモデルということで非常に印象はあります。
Bernie, you are the premier digital turntablist in the world. I mean, that's got to feel pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's like a big honor because, with the technology, everything changing, and, it's like this is being on the cutting edge. And, turntablism is like cutting edge anyways.
Yeah.
So it's cool.
So what do you think the CDJ 1000 is going to do for the industry?
Well, there's a lot of companies that try to emulate the turntable, making the CD, scratchable.
Has it worked? I mean, are the other companies?
Yeah, no. That's why, things are they're still true vinylists and stuff, because nothing can really do, like the turntable until now with this piece, so the CDJ 1000. So big ups to Pioneer for that, hooking it up.
All right. Right now, we're going to have world-renowned producer, DJ, artist, Roger Sanchez, getting busy on the CDJ 1000. Let's check it out right now.
How you doing? My name is Roger Sanchez, and I'm here to give you a quick demonstration of what the CDJ 1000 can do for all types of DJs, hip-hop, house, dance music, whatever you want. This is the future.
Somewhere along the 8 years between the 1000 and the 2000, I remember speaking to Pioneer as they were saying, what do you think about putting a USB drive on it? The shift from CDs is going to happen very, very quickly to USBs. And I think it's absolutely necessary to put it on the CDJ. And when they introduced the 2000, I'm like, oh, I like that.
CDJ500 から CDJ1000 までは、CD プレイヤーという形なんですが、当時2000年に入ってから PC で DJ をするという流れが出てきてました。そうすると、もうそういうスタイルがある中、もうずっと CD プレイヤーを作り続けるというよりも、ここでファイルミュージック、MP3 などのファイルミュージックを使うプレイヤーも出すべきだという論議があって、その形で CDJ2000 を企画いたしました。
アナログから CD に変わるときも大きな変革期でいろんなチャレンジが当然あったんですけど、いろんな困難やいろんなご指摘もあったんですけれども、やっぱり次の大きな変化点は、CD からファイルミュージックに移るとき、これもやっぱり大きな変化点で、計画していたやっぱり日程よりも随分伸びてしまって、なかなか導入にこぎつけることができなかったというのは今でも覚えています。
I did not make the full transition over to USB properly until 2012, 2013. I fought it like mad. And then when I did it, it was like, oh my God, why haven't I done this? Like, why did it take me so long?
First of all, my life became more easier because now you have USB.
Love the fact that I can carry so much in just like a little stick.
当時はやはりCD に入る曲数というのは限られていましたけれども、ファイルミュージックになってシリコンストレージになると、今度はもう容量がもう格段に数倍、数十倍、数百倍と多くなってきますので。
A lot of people were kind of over burning CDs.
Hours to put the music on the CD and then to make some notes like every track.
I was so over writing the little CD inlay sleeves that I could get into a dark club and then I wouldn't, what does this mean? Whose handwriting is this?
It took so much time, honestly.
The CDJ 2000 sort of solved all of that.
I could see properly what I was doing. In the dark, I didn't have to be shuffling about with CDs.
So you could just rock up, put the USB key in, and it was stress-free.
This is like the best way to DJ. Like, I don't want a laptop, I don't want anything else. I just want to plug my USB in and use this. It's got everything I need.
ファイルミュージック対応のプレイヤーには必ず、コンピューターとつなぐということが必要になってきます。そうすると、DJ のアプリケーションは、同時に必要になってくる。なので CDJ2000 の開発と同時に DJ アプリケーション、レコードボックスの開発も同時にスタートしました。
The biggest strides were made, I think, funny enough, in the back end with Rekordbox and how Rekordbox really became more than just a playlisting interface.
All of a sudden it became organized. So how you would have organized your record box, the real record box, suddenly became the record box.
Rekordbox, this is like one of the coolest things which I have, you know.
So you could have comments on your tracks that scrolled along the screen. So there was a lot of similarities at that point from how I used to play with records.
You know, categorize everything. There's tags, there's like easy ways to search.
You can organize alphabetically, you can organize by artist, and giving you that metadata.
You had your waveforms, the ability to kind of start to mark different sections to drop to. It became far more detailed and far more agile to be able to move around and do different things with the 2000.
CD の場合は、1曲、何曲か入ってて、その曲から選ぶというだけなんですが、ファイルミュージックの場合は、何百曲何千曲を入れることができる。一つの USB の中に。そうすると、そこの中から1曲をどうやって選び出すのかという。そのプロセスをどうやって簡単に早く するというところが重要なのですが、そこのプロセスを作るのが苦労しました。
It was pretty much a very far leap forward in how to create something that's going to be able to really help me do performances at another level.
I remember I got an email from Pioneer in May 2009 and they said we have some CDJs to send you. The CDJ 2000 arrived, and at that point a lot of the features weren't actually working, but all the screen printing and everything on the unit was done, so I could see what was coming.
The very first thing I noticed was there was more precision on the looping. Now they finally got the quantizing and the gridding right.
You can actually get the loop dead on without stressing too much.
Quantization was a major one because up until that point, looping could be very haphazard in a live situation, you know, keeping the stuff in time.
It allowed me to really start expanding my sets to like 4 decks now.
So if you can loop a great part, mix it over, you kind of make a mashup.
The unique things that can be done with the CDJ, the unique tricks and little moments that you can sprinkle into your set.
When we got to the 2000, then I was able to really expand it and say, okay, I'm going to now have a loop here, an acapella here, maybe a piano line here, and a groove over here, and really just kind of remix everything on the spot. The precision really was what made it that much different than the previous iterations.
My heart is still with the 2000 Nexus.
Once we got to the Nexus 2s, that's all I needed.
The Nexus and the Nexus 2s, they refined the tech and they also made the system even more stable.
Really having the Nexus as opposed to just the 2000s, because there's so much more that you can do with the cue points.
Hot cue auto load is obviously a great thing. You can load a track and within seconds jump to the point that you need to.
I like that the jog wheel is a bit heavier. You've got a bit more balance with that.
想定していたような使い方じゃない使い方でいろんな演奏のパターンを生み出してきてるっていうのはやはり印象に残っていますね。
You know, some people's approach with cue points and these models of CDJs is it almost becomes an MPC.
If you wanted to, you could finger drum on the CDJ. In the right moment, it's a great performance piece and looks and can sound cool.
もともとね、キューボタンっていうのは楽曲のですね、頭出しの部分をキューするポイントを記録するために作られたんですけども、これがやっぱりサンプラーとしてやっぱり使ってるっていうのも、これも一つの大きな例だと思いますけれども、そういう使い方するんだっていうのは。
Look at someone like EZ, you know, the way that he mixes is like completely unique to him. He's really made this like his own machine and his sound, and I think the possibilities are endless with the CDJs.
I'm half in the party and half like, you know, looking into the DJ booth at what's going on.
The evil sync button.
I don't even know where it is.
Isn't something that I've ever used.
Some people absolutely love the sync button. It was like great. And then other people just despised it.
I mean, it's a thing that I really detest.
It says beat sync here, but I don't even really pay attention to it because I've never used it.
You could start to use the sync feature, which was prevalent in DJ software, so it had to be added to be competitive.
I don't have a problem with anybody that does it, but that's not what I consider necessarily the art form.
All of a sudden, it did start to do the work for you.
The introduction of the sync button, quantizing and all those features, you know, has made the entry level easier.
I've nothing against it, and I think it has opened the gate for a lot of people that perhaps otherwise wouldn't be able to play sets, especially producers that aren't DJs.
They introduced the sync button, as far as I understood it from them, for people that weren't necessarily going to be DJing professionally, but wants to try it out, and it could be a good introduction to then move them further into the world of DJing. I never looked at it as a problem. I just looked at it as, well, there's another feature. I don't necessarily want to use it, but somebody else might. It never bothered me. It really bothered a lot of people, which kind of made me wonder what it was exposing.
But, you know, it's called the future. You know, you can't live in the past all your life.
Huge difference for me was 3000. The whole model, you know, it felt like such a big jump.
It was just next level. The look of it, the functionality of it, the fact that it was then a touch screen.
What stands out about the 3000s to me is that they are huge.
The huge screen with all these hot cues on the screen.
A nice bright, huge screen. It's weird actually when you use one of those and then you don't realize it. When you go back to using the previous model, the screen feels tiny.
And then now that I've gotten used to the screen, sometimes when I come back to the 2000 Nexus, I'm like, whoa, this feels so small.
Well, one of the things I really like is the ability to jump around within your playlist using the touch screen. Now I can access things not just quicker, but I can see them in a very different array.
First thing I noticed, it was like a lot more responsive, it was bigger, it was like the waveforms were clearer.
The bit processing just sounds way better on the 3000s, it really does.
Polyrhythmic looping is quite a lot of fun. It's a cool way to go from sort of a house record to a drum and bass track.
The actual quantizing and lock is so much better, and the fact that on the back end, Rekordbox analyzes all the tracks that you import. Then if you need to regrid, you could do it straight on the CDJ. There's certain things that you can do in real time that before you kind of had a preface and you had to do in pre-prep. Just the kind of combination between the two has just made it that much more powerful for me to be able to go, okay, I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna try this on the fly.
You know, you'll never want to use another machine, and it's true. It's just a brilliant, brilliant machine, and I will not use anything else.
I can't imagine how to play with any other CDJs.
あまりですね、これといった大きな秘密は実はなくてですね、愚直にお客様の声を聞いて、お客様が何を求めてるんだっていうことを真剣に考えて、それをやってきたというのがまず一つ大きなところとしてはあると思います。
They have been pivotal in DJing and moving things forward, but in a way that's logical and in a way that consumers want.
Oh, Pioneer has been instrumental in the evolution of DJing. Every single club you go to, there's going to be Pioneer CDJs.
The CDJ has never left my rig.
That beautiful black box has evolved into something quite special.
As humans, we constantly evolve. Technology and completely advances at an exponential rate.
Like with anything, you know, you can't stay still. You have to evolve with the technology, with the industry.
Really, it's that sort of excitement of getting a new toy.
It's found its place, obviously, not only with me and my entire career, but with so many others. And
Pioneer is the industry standard.
Where can you go? What else do we need?
As technology keeps moving forward and as different mediums are being introduced, it's important for technology to keep pace and try to anticipate what's coming next.
今スタンダードである CDJ を当社がどうやってそれを超えた商品を出していくかっていうのは一つの目標にしたいなというふうに思っています。